Welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast, the official podcast of Ryan Johnson Ministries. This podcast was created for the purpose of equipping others for the advancement of the kingdom of God. We hope that you enjoy this episode and encourage you to subscribe to the Blacksmith Chronicles today. For more information about Ryan Johnson Ministries, please visit www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us.
Hey guys, welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. This week, I have the distinct privilege and honor to welcome a guest who has a fascinating background, but a phenomenal story that I genuinely believe everyone needs to hear and what he's sharing for us to go forward. So without further ado, I want to welcome this week's guest, Jim Jenkins, to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. Jim, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited to get to do this.
So I imagine, like in life, in every aspect, there's people that is going, wait a minute, who is Jim Jenkins? Give us a little bit of a background of who you are.
Well, I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, Steel Town, and I got saved there during the real turbulent time in the late 60s, early 70s. It was in the early 70s that I was born again, and I went on to be a pastor for over 40 years. 20 of those years, I was a reserve chaplain in the Navy. And then I also taught seminary courses at the King's Seminary for a decade in the middle of all that. So kind of wore a lot of hats, but pertinent to our time today, when I was serving, Navy chaplains do the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Marine Corps. So I did a little bit of everything. And I was with Coast Guard when 9/11 happened. And so that's how I ended up at Ground Zero. I was part of a team of chaplains at Ground Zero.
So before we dive into that, in understanding what took place on 9/11 and your role at Ground Zero, kind of give me an understanding of what it was like to serve as a chaplain in the military for those that are actually serving this nation.
A singular honor. I mean, to get to do that. As I mentioned, I was in Navy units for some of that, Coast Guard, Marine Corps. And in each instance, they all have their own culture. They have their own challenges and things they face. And with me, I knew that I wasn't, a squared away military personality, but I really had a burden. I've always loved the military. I have an uncle that won the Silver Star in the Pacific, and I've had so much regard for that and the veterans. So my ministry all along has been, I can't tell you how many veterans funerals I've done. It's in the hundreds, I'm sure. Especially the World War II era vets are almost all gone now. Now it's the Vietnam era vets. But my time with the chaplain corps was really magnificent at a number of levels, because I couldn't do what they were doing. I remember when I was with Marines, I was counseled by a senior chaplain. He said, don't try to out-Marine the Marines. You're not a Marine. You're a pastor, you're a chaplain there with them. And I kept that in mind. And I got to be with them when they got back from deployments. I don't think anybody knows the stresses that accompany coming back, the marriages that break up, the addiction things that happen, the PTSD. So a lot of my ministry has been geared toward that.
So your life not only was interactive to the degree of while they're serving, but because of being a chaplain, it allowed you to be a part of other individuals outside of their service. And I think that, to me, hearing that is rather interesting and phenomenal, to be able to see that dynamic and be a part. And you're right, there's, we cannot comprehend nor understand exactly what the men and women battle once they get back here and at home and everything. And it is a battle. It's a lot of times it's fatigue, it's mental, it's spiritual. There's just so many things. And a chaplain, whether in any branch of the military, is a much needed vessel of importance. And so I thank you for your willingness to serve, willingness to love the military, love this nation, and what you were able to do, but also beyond the pastoring and helping people grow in the relationship with Christ, and beyond the chaplain, it actually, you brought up and mentioned you were helping the Coast Guard at that time, but that positioned you for the 9/11, what took place, and being there at ground zero. Walk me through some of that details.
Well, like everybody else on September 11th, I was pastoring a church in Oregon, where I live, and I got a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning. Somebody from the congregation didn't even identify themselves, just said, turn on the TV. Like everybody in America probably had that kind of an experience. And so I watched it all day. And I can't explain this, but I can tell you that the longer I watched the coverage of that day, I just knew I was going to go there. I didn't know how. And so I listened and tried to take in as much. I was wondering at the time, because I was an active reservist, I thought, okay, are we at war now? Am I going to be deployed? Is my will in order? What's next? My chain of command. I'm thinking about all that, thinking about the church. And I had a niece and nephew. My nephew worked at Goldman Sachs. He was probably in Manhattan right then. My niece worked at Reuters. She saw from her building, I learned later, she saw the second plane hit at eye level. And she was in that mass of people that went across the Brooklyn Bridge on foot. So I had all that on, but that first night, when I used to do critical incident stress debriefings for first responders, there's a real technique about that when you debrief people after a real bad incident. And the first thing is the phase where everybody says, okay, this was my role in this particular incident. The second phase, they ask this question: after you went off autopilot, what was your first thought? So for me, September 11th, before I finally went to sleep that night, did you ever notice the best sportscasters, you and I were talking, you're sports fans, right? The best sportscasters know when to shut up and just play the crowd noise. Mm-hmm. Well, this news, I forget which anchor it was, but they were showing at the end of the night before I went to bed, they were showing an aerial photo from one of the news helicopters that were taking pictures. They were watching the people waving in the windows, come and get us out of here. And they zoomed in at the end of the day down, you could see these little, almost like little ants. And they were first responders with their bare hands and buckets, trying to lift the debris and looking for people right then. And the guy shut up and just played they showed the footage. And in the background, you could hear this chirping sound. I thought, what is that? It sounded like, you know, when your smoke alarm battery dies, that noise. Yeah. Sounded like that, or crickets at night. And so my first thought was, am I going to be deployed to a war now? But excuse me, right on the heels of that, my thought was, what's that sound? Couldn't get it out of my head. Took me 2 days to find out what it was. They were interviewing a firefighter at the pile. And he was saying, well, I'm down here, and you could hear that sound for the first day anyway, the immediate first day afterwards. The reporter explained what it was. Every firefighter wore a thing called a pass alarm on their turnout gear. And if they're trapped, or if they can't move, or if they can't breathe, the sound I heard that first night was 300 firefighters buried in that rubble. So that's how it all lit off. And then a couple of days later, I went up through my chain of command, and I ended up calling the chief of chaplain's office, and I volunteered to be part of a team of chaplains. And that's how I got back there.
My goodness. And I do, for me, I do remember the moment that happened, and, you know, looking at the television, looking at the news, listening to different news outlets, radio, and trying to figure out what is going on. You know, this isn't initially an accident. I remember being glued and actually seeing the moment that the towers fell. And that thought comes across, are we at war? Are we at this? And, you know, here we are, we're coming up just in the celebration of 20-year anniversary. And I don't even feel necessarily right in using the terminology anniversary to that, but I don't know how, other than maybe a 20th remembrance.
Yeah.
But so many individuals lost their lives the day that the tower fell. Others have, our towers fell. Others have lost their lives afterwards because of sickness, maybe from the destruction, inhaling destruction. Some, unfortunately, have lost due to suicide, depression, whatever the case may be. It was not a one moment catastrophe. It was something that was lingering in that process. So I imagine you know that going into this, but when you actually get at ground zero, what is that first maybe reaction and thought that really hit you the moment that you see what has actually happened?
Well, I think I'll start with the flight there, because planes were just starting to fly again. And so I was on a pretty big plane, and there were probably 15 people in it. So I talked to the flight attendants. It was a United Airlines flight. So I had a chance to minister to them on the way out, because many of them knew their colleagues that died in that plane, the United plane that was involved.
Yeah.
And so when I finally got there, I got there at night, rented a car, and then drove to Battery Park in Manhattan. And the way I describe it in the book, in the plagues of Egypt, you know, there was the frogs and the blood in the Nile and everything. One of them was, quote, a darkness that could be felt. And that's what it was like when I got to Battery Park that night. There were National Guard guys in combat gear, weapons at the ready, in Battery Park in Manhattan. They ran a mirror under my rental car to see if there was a bomb. I had orders in hand, and I went through 3 checkpoints before I was even allowed to connect with and start the whole process. So I'd been to New York, that's a whole other story about the year before, but I went to my nephew's wedding the year before. So I'd seen Manhattan when Manhattan was Manhattan. This was so surreal. So got there later that night, found out where we were going to be staying. Then we had a whole day just to get the credentials, a number of badges to be able to be down there, because it was the biggest crime scene in American history. Because all sorts of security things about even being there. So when I finally saw it, the TV images couldn't give you a sense of the scope of how vast the destruction was. I've seen a lot of footage over the years of Berlin, World War II, after the bombing. It looked like that. I saw big buildings in the periphery of it. There was one when I first was getting oriented to the site. I looked up, and it was, I'm guessing, it's hard to guess even what a block would look like, but I'm guessing it was at least a block away. And there was this big thing sticking out of it. It looked like a giant toothpick out of the corner of this building way up high. So I said to this other chaplain who was just getting started, like I was just getting started, I said, the only thing I can guess is maybe one of the planes clipped that building on the way in. Some construction guy behind me at the pile said, "Excuse me, chaplain, don't mean to interrupt you, but that beam didn't come from that building." Apparently the explosion when those planes hit was so powerful, it shot an I-beam almost a block away and impaled it into that other building. I found out years later that almost over a year later, on the top of that building, they found human remains. So it was, you couldn't take it all in, but my first thought was, I would learn all this later. I did a lot of research over the years, you can imagine, but victim 0001, the first medical examiner's recorded autopsy of a victim of 9/11 was a chaplain. It's a Catholic priest by the name of Michael Judge. And his body was one of the few intact bodies they recovered. There's this iconic picture of firefighters carrying him out, his dead body. And I learned about him, and apparently he had these little laminated cards he would take when he'd visit the firefighters, when he'd go on his rounds and visit the fire units. And on it was a prayer. And this is what it said: "Lord, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say. And the last line is, and keep me out of your way. That was my prayer, that I would not say anything stupid or careless. Did you ever notice when you're nervous, sometimes you can say something and then you go, oh, what did I say that for? I was really concerned about that. And I prayed that prayer.
Well, that's what I was just about. What was going through my mind is I cannot comprehend the magnitude of that because I wasn't there physically. I only saw the images that so many people saw. But being there in that moment, even hearing about that beam being catapulted, over a block away, was there this moment of being overwhelmed by what was before you, even as a chaplain, a man of God, faith, believing, did a sense of, I don't even know where to begin or what to do?
Yes. It happened more middle of my experience. I have to tell you that the actual testimony to the Lord's power was, I did know what to do moment to moment for about the first 5 or 6 days. I mean, even probably the look on my face, I felt I would walk up to something. There was such a sense of divine appointment. I did a little bit of research about your ministry before, and knowing we were going to talk, and I know that you recently talked about words of knowledge. I can't tell you how that, there were times when I said exactly the right thing, and I knew I did. There were times when I met somebody, or here's an example at the morgue. Our day as chaplains, the first 3 hours we were at the pilot cell. That's where, by the time I got there, they were looking for bodies and body parts. 3 hours of that, then we got into a van, then we went to the morgue, which was a little MASH hospital type thing attached to the medical examiner's office in Manhattan. One day I was there, and I'm talking to all these funeral directors from a group called DMORT. They volunteer to go respond to disasters like Oklahoma City, Katrina, things like that. And I met all these amazing people who came to help do exams and forensic workers and everything. So one day I was near a tent where they had, I don't know how else to put this. I don't mean to be too graphic, but it'll give you a sense of the significance of this moment. They had a big plywood wall at the end of the block of this tent thing, just a bare plywood. And it was put there to hide the refrigerator trucks that had pieces of people. And they would go and retrieve something, come into these tents and examine it, and then try to determine male or female, DNA, any identifying things. So one day we were cautioned as chaplains not to look at all that. If we could get around it, just be with the people, because they knew how powerful that would be to be destructive and hurtful. And one day I was just talking to somebody near the tent and I couldn't help see what I saw. And frankly, I can't unsee what I saw. But this funeral director came up. He must have seen the look on my face. He came up to me, intentionally got between me and what I was looking at, put his arm around me, said, "Come on, chaplain, let's go get a cup of coffee." And I found out he's a Christian. He gave me his testimony and why he does what he does. It's in the Midwest somewhere. And while we were talking, he looked at me 1 minute and he said, "You know what, chaplain?" I said, "No, what?" He said, "There are a lot worse things than dying." Oh, coming from him and what he had seen and smelled and touched, it was really a word of knowledge for me. So around that same time, I'm having coffee at a Salvation Army truck. They were amazing, the Salvation Army. Having a cup of coffee, and I see over at the medical examiner's office, there's these 3 young women, and they have scrubs on, surgical scrubs. And they looked troubled. And they looked like they were upset about something. Then they got in a little huddle. And right then I looked at them, and I can say it this way, I always watch how I refer to things, but I'll just say, I believe the Lord showed me this. I saw them, and the thought popped into my head, go over there right now and say this: I was over here and I watched you a minute ago. Can I help you with something? So I did it. I went over, they had gotten in their little huddle, and I tapped his shoulder, the one I thought was the leader. I said, excuse me, I was over here. And I'm in a uniform that has the cross on it, so they know I'm a chaplain, right? So I went, I said, I was over here, I saw you. I said, is there something I can help you with? And they all started to cry. And the lady looked at me and said, we're forensic workers. I think they were from Nevada or somewhere. I'm sorry, I don't remember that detail now, but said, we've come here to help, but we don't have all the badges we need to get in where we're going. We can't find out where to go. And we prayed and we asked the Lord to send somebody to help us. I said, I can help you with that. I know where to take you. So then they laughed and we were real joyful. The Lord did that because they said they were Christians. Turns out we were from the same denomination. I knew their pastor's name. So those kind of things took place. And that's how he helped me. Later, I'll have a story to tell you about the real pivotal thing, but I don't want to interrupt the flow of what you're doing. But
no, I want to hear that, because what kind of caught me off guard initially when I was thinking about that, my mind told me you arrive on the scene and you automatically feel overwhelmed. But then you're saying it came 5 to 6 days later. I'm curious to, why do you think that happened? Or was there a greater purpose behind it? That part of it really kind of caught me off guard a little bit. I think I have an understanding a lot of times, people in desperate times of help, people rise to the occasion. You hear the stories of adrenaline, people picking up cars and all that. I initially think that, but it just at the same time, we're talking about 9/11. I mean,
well, I have to tell you, I believe that's, I've talked to so many combat veterans, and they won't describe everything. They just won't. But when they get around and they are talking to a chaplain or they trust me, they'll tell me some stuff. And the phrase comes out over and over again. They say, my training kicked in. And as I mentioned, I'd been doing critical incident stress debriefings all along before this. So I at least knew that I had to put if I could, keep a rein on my own emotions, listen far more than I talked, and be attentive to people's body language and stuff. So I had some training in that. But I do want to say, I believe the Lord helped me to do that. Because seriously, every instinct I had as a local church pastor was almost antithetical to what I was having to do there. Here's one of the things that troubled me, still does. I couldn't stop with every person. My instinct as a pastor, I wanted to stay with every one of them for hours, and I couldn't. I'd hear this gripping story and then hear another one and another one and another one, 10 of these, 20 of those. That's the part that was kind of overwhelming, but because of the training, again, I had to trust that my brief moments with them were going to be significant, and they were.
It's really amazing to hear that. Of course, it's not just frontline workers. It's not just military personnel. It's not, CEOs and assistants and all these people that were trapped in buildings and stuff. You also were fortunate enough are blessed with the opportunity to encounter Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and kind of give me a little bit of what happened when you had that encounter.
Well, I want to tell you right briefly before that, I want to tell you about you again, to come back to the gifts of the Spirit and how they work in a setting like this. There was this one crane operator that I saw at the pile every day. His name was Sal. And he was the quintessential New Yorker, big, burly guy. I can't do it, but it was kind of like, how you doing? And I'm doing all right, Sal. And we talk, and he was really upbeat given what he was doing. He had this big bucket machine, and they'd dig and shake, and they were looking for body parts. And so one day I talked to him 3 or 4 days, and it just occurred to me. And you and I know what that means about the Holy Spirit prompting you to do something. So one day he's just really upbeat with me. I used to go talk to him to be encouraged. and so I'm talking to him this one day, and it just occurred to me to ask him. And I pointed to the pile and I said, Sal, I never thought to ask you. I said, do you do you have anybody? He got down off his machine, turned his hard hat around, and there were 2 pictures taped to his hard hat. His brother and his brother's son, who were both firefighters, were in that pile. And that led to a chance to pray for that guy that was so powerful. I'm safe saying he will never forget that moment because the Lord meant it. So there was that. Now, you asked about the thing with the mayor. First part of the day at the pile, 3 hours. Second part every day at the morgue, 3 hours. The last part of the day was with the families. Giant pier building on the other end of Manhattan. And so after we were with the families, they decided, the city did a good thing, I think. It's a hard thing, but a good thing. They made provision for people to, I'm sorry. I should have turned this off, I'm sorry.
It's all good.
They made provision for family members, 50 at a time, on a passenger ferry to go to a staging area prepared just for them to see Ground Zero. When they got there, well, I'll just tell you, let me tell you how they introduced it. I get goosebumps every time I remember this. The lady's name was Lieutenant Grace Telesco. She was NYPD and she was a psychiatrist or a psychologist. She was in charge of the response to helping the family members. So she got up this one day, and these people are sitting there, 50 of them, that had asked to be on this. They did numerous trips after this. This was the first one. There are 50 people just sitting straight with their hands in their lap like kids in school that thought they were in trouble. And so Grace got up and she said, okay, many of you, you're not here. You've asked to be here. You wouldn't be here unless you wanted to do this today. So we want to do this, but we want to give you all the help we can. So she introduced us. She said, we have some chaplains that are going to go with you. We have some mental health workers. And then she said, but there's one other group that wanted to be with you today. They flew here to New York on their own dime because they felt like they're the only people in the world that would know exactly how you feel right now. And I thought, what's this all about? She had them stand up. Every one of them had lost somebody in the Oklahoma City bombing. And they came to be with these people. It was like a warm blanket. You know how in the emergency room, they'll give you a warm blanket? It was like a warm blanket just descended on those people. So that's how we got started. Then we got on the ferry. I saw that the mayor was there, and he went around to every one of those people, got down on his knee and looked up at them and heard their stories, went through the aisles, and we were just sitting with different ones of them. So we get down to the pile. We got out, walked through Wall Street. People in Wall Street came out of the buildings and took their hats off over their hearts. People went by. So when we got there, you can imagine every response you could think of. Some people screamed. A couple of them vomited. This one lady pulled out clumps of her hair till her scalp bled. It was, so there's all this visceral reaction. So then finally, the mayor gets up. He's probably about 10 feet in front of me. The pile's behind him. And he said, I'm not going to interrupt this time and talk a lot, but I just want to orient you to what you're looking at, because you couldn't make sense of what you were looking at. He said, Tower 1 was here. And immediately, this guy that I was with, I was worried about him from the minute I saw him. He looked like a heart attack about to happen. He starts yelling at the mayor. He said, this is all your fault. My son's dead. This is all your fault. And he started getting real agitated. And then he started to move toward the mayor, and then his knees buckled. I grabbed one arm. Giuliani came and grabbed the other one. And he just kept patting the man's chest, saying, I'm so sorry about your son. And I just saw the weight of the world that was on that man's shoulder. Everything. He was there that day. He saw jumpers land on the pavement in front of him, Giuliani. People don't know that about him. He lost personal friends. You know, the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, one of them died. These were all people he met with every week. So anyway, that's how that went. On the way back, he did an interesting thing. He said, he came over to me. He grabbed both my hands and he kept staring at my face. He said, thank you for coming here to be with us. I thought it's interesting how he said it, to be with us. The word for the Holy Spirit, paraclete, come alongside to help. So there was that thing about the face. Maybe another part of this, I'll talk about my face. There was a couple of things the Lord did with that. But
I'm fascinated because, of course, the current climate of our media aren't typically going to share stories like this. That's the first I've heard of.
Well, it was so private, I wouldn't have mentioned it either. After all this time, I can say it in generalities with no names. I feel okay with that, but I didn't initially.
Yeah, it's just astonishing to hear those stories and realize this is such a real impactful moment of time for so many individuals, not only for the people of New York, beyond that. In my case, I have a distant relative that he lost his son. His son was in the tower, and but it's one of those things that, for multiple different reasons, it impacts a lot of people for different ways and stuff. But we're in this moment now where I think back, and I remember, as much as I remember 9/11, I also remember 9/12. And I remember just the sense of individuals realizing this is bigger than us. We have to rise up. We have to let our pettiness down. We have to learn how to love our brothers and sisters, whether we see eye to eye or not. It's not a Democrat thing. It's not a Republican thing. We are individuals, white, brown, black, yellow, whatever the case may be. We're a nation of diversity, but on 9/12, there felt this unity to be, I'm just simply an American, and I'm hurting. I don't know what to do. In some cases, I do know what to do. I need help. I need this. And I can remember both days very distinctively. Now, I genuinely, although we're only looking at 20 years, I genuinely feel like, and this is my opinion, and you can give insight or correction as needed in this, but I genuinely feel like there are many in our current time who have failed to remember the magnitude of 9/11, and likewise failed to understand the importance of 9/12 in that process. So as you look back, as you remember, as you gather the memories, the stories, the timeframes, all of that, what are you feeling in this moment 20 years later concerning our nation, concerning the church, concerning politics, whatever the case may be? What is it that you're sensing and feeling in these days?
Well, it's been a lot of different things. The real decision to write this book is tied to this, in a tangential kind of way. On the 10th anniversary, I live in Oregon, and I was driving down to California to be part of a commencement exercise for the seminary that I taught at. And I got near the Bay Area on the I-5 going south, and KGO has this massive station. We can hear their programs in Oregon. So they had a talk show on, and they were talking about the Ground Zero Mosque. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And what I was hearing was making me crazy. I thought, it's only been 10 years, and all the calls were about Islamophobia, xenophobia. It was our fault. Nothing about the families. Nobody even considered how the people in Manhattan would feel about an Islamic center being built right next to Ground Zero. So first time in my life I ever did anything like this, I pulled off the I-5 onto the shoulder. First thing I did was I really hoped and prayed that the truckers whizzing by me got a good night's rest before, because I was on the shoulder of the interstate, and I kept dialing until I got on.
I've drove that road too. I know it.
Okay, well, so I got on this show, And the guy let me talk. I told him I was a chaplain at Ground Zero, and then he just let me talk for about 15, 20 minutes. But I could tell he was also getting kind of tense because I was going counter to the narrative that they were discussing. And so finally, it was time for the break, and he said, well, you've certainly given us something to think about. And I'm grateful to him, by the way, that he let me talk that long. So I get back on the interstate and go to the first rest area I can find and listen to the rest of the show. I wanted to see, what did people do with what I just said? This young 20-something was the first call after mine. This guy called in. He said, wow, man, that last dude, man, he was like, oh, that was a bummer. He said, those people in New York, they just had a bad karma. I almost threw up. I got teary, and I promised right then, I promised the Lord and I promised myself, as long as I'm alive, I'm going to tell my story, the truth of what I saw. Remember this part, Franklin Graham got in a whole lot of trouble right around that period, not 9/12, but around that period. All he said was, it wasn't Methodists that flew those planes into those buildings. And a firestorm came down on him and his ministry. They were so bitter about him personally that the Comfort, the big hospital ship, the USNS Comfort, the big white, they would not let that be used in New York during the pandemic because the hatred of Franklin Graham went back that far. And then the fact that he took his issue with some gender things and was forthright from the Bible. So my thought is right now, I'm watching it already. They're talking about the Taliban like a sovereign nation. And that, are we going to have ambassadors next? I am agitated about that just because I was in the military. I know what the Afghan veterans are going through right now. I know the number of suicides that have taken place in the military of all the people that were deployed in Iraq and in Afghanistan that got home. I met a guy one time in the bushes. I feel okay saying this. I didn't get his name, and I'm not going to try to use his name. I thought he was dead. I was on my way into a Denny's restaurant in Eugene, Oregon, and I saw these feet sticking out of the bushes. So I went over to see if he was alive, and the guy popped out. He was a homeless fellow that all sunburned and just disheveled, and he smelled bad. But he had a ball cap on, said Marine Corps. And he looked at me like, what are you going to do? And I said, I just noticed your cap, and I wanted to thank you for your service. And he recited every set of orders he had during the Vietnam era, how many tours he did. He didn't ask me for any money, but he said, my VA doctor, he's trying to get a hold of me to get me some meds. And I thought, how many guys like that and ladies are running around like that, broken? Because there's no clarity to our mission about what we're doing in the world. And so, yes, I think about that a lot.
It is.
That wasn't too much to say.
No, it is startling because, and I have to admit, I know, like anything else, that there are people who will define good Muslims, bad Muslims.
Yes.
You know, and I know that, and I'm not trying to discredit any individual, male, female, who is a student of Islam. I'm not trying to discredit
nor am I.
at all.
You're right.
However, in saying that, I will admit that within 10 years of 9/11, seeing a representative elected to Congress who is extremely outspoken, pro-Islam and anti-America, everything, because of their background and family, and then seeing more representatives elected, it is a bit shocking to me.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be as surprising if we had a representative that was of Islamic faith, but they weren't the extreme Islamic faith that we know of. And that's a reality in that. It's just like there are extreme individuals who profess Christian.
You're right.
And they cause terror and panic and so on and so forth. Now, I say that, and I also acknowledge that that number is a lot less than an Islamic Taliban or Al-Qaeda in those numbers. And it is extremely frustrating on the heels of a 20th remembrance of 9/11 to see Kabul, Afghanistan, fall to a group that is the furthest thing from governmental in everything, but to see the violence towards Afghani individuals, men, women, and children, Christians in Afghanistan and beyond. And I go back to it. I genuinely go, do you not understand the magnitude of what has taken place? And now, of course, we're living in this moment where threats are continue to increase, and even more because you may have saw it, Jim, but I was dumbfounded at a news reporter who reports from the streets of Kabul and says they're chanting death to America. But other than that, they seem real peaceful.
It's like in Portland, Oregon here during the riots. The guy said these are mostly peaceful, and he had his microphone. Behind him, there were buildings burning.
Yeah,
so, but it's mostly peaceful.
I struggle with it, and naturally, I'm not as old as I think that I am, but I'm definitely not as young as I once was. So I have a good memory of it, but my children don't. No. My youngest daughter, her name is Brooklyn, and everybody asked if we named her after 9/11. And the irony of that is she was born July of 01, but
oh my,
yeah, so it was pre 9/11, but because of her age, because she's 20, everybody automatically, they think we named her after that. But see, they don't remember. None of my 4 children remember. My oldest daughter will be 23 in December, but she was 3 years old, almost 3 when it happened. So I recognize that there is an entire generation before us, 25 and under, that has no recollection of this other than historical documents, in history classes in schools, college, whatever the case may be. And this is why I think it's so valuable to have your perception. You've wrote these stories, you've wrote these experiences in a book. You've put this book out, from Rubble to redemption. I tried to say 2 words with one. From Rubble to redemption. And you put this out here. When you did this, did you have some kind of understanding or a thought process of ultimately I'm writing this because, but since it's come together, you realize the magnitude is beyond what you originally thought?
Absolutely. And I did have a sense of calling to write this. I've been tucking notes away for 10 years, but I knew the 20th anniversary was coming up, and I'm not getting any younger either. And I wanted to do it while I had the vigor to do the work and get it done and everything. And so I felt like there was just so much happening that was ramping up to this. But here in general is kind of the message that, and if I have time, I do want to tell you one thing about attendant to this. But the big picture, I answered your question, is the title itself. Everybody has rubble. Our cities have rubble because of riots now. People have the rubble of a divorce or a firing from their career or a cancer diagnosis or a brokenness. We have broken things, we have broken people, and now we have a broken country. And so what I wanted to say was, okay, given that brokenness, what the Lord did in and through me when I was there was so powerful. I wanted to tell the story that even at the biggest rubble thing that most of us can remember, the Lord was active from day one. From moment one, he was ministering to people. And I wanted to say to people, he can reach you in your rubble now. So now, if I may, I want to tell you the story about this amazing encounter. The day that I kind of hit the wall myself was about halfway through. We were with the families, and one lady from Goldman said her husband was with Cantor Fitzgerald. That's that company that lost over 500 people that day. So she was trying to find a rabbi, and I was helping her. And so I did it all. It all got done. I had my game face on. But after that, I felt wobbly. I got as far away as I could from anybody in that giant pier building, sat down on the concrete, and just started to pray in the spirit. I said, oh, Lord, help me. Groaning's too deep for words. And so there's nobody back there. You know, you get that feeling sometimes somebody's watching you. Felt like somebody was watching me. And then I felt like somebody's breathing on me. And the breath was really gross. I thought, what is this? So I look up. There's this beautiful German shepherd staring at me. Came over and he put his head in my lap, looked up at me and let me pet him. And the dam just broke. I cried. That's the only time I cried back there. And it went on for a couple of minutes, and it just felt so cathartic. So I look up at the lady, the handler, and I said, what's the dog's name? I thought she said Bruno. And I said, oh, well, thank you so much. I tickled Bruno's ear some more, got back in the fray, finished my time back in New York, and I come back to Oregon. 2 years later, I'm starting to have some PTSD kinds of things happen. I went to visit a little girl in the hospital from our church, was in the pediatric unit at the hospital in Eugene. Come out in the hallway. There's a German shepherd in the hallway kind of looking up at me. And it reminded me of the whole thing with Bruno. And I think I may even said Bruno. He jumped up on me. I looked at the lady and I said, Ground Zero? She said, we were at grounds. It was the same dog.
Wow.
So I'm so overwhelmed and I'm so dense. I didn't get her name the first time in New York. I never thought to ask her name or contact information this time. I was so wrapped up with the dog and the impact it had on me. I was thrilled, and I went back, and for years I looked on the internet after that for Bruno and Ground Zero. I found other dog stories that were very powerful, but I couldn't find. I thought, so 17 years later, catch this one. 17 years later, my sister's dying back in Florida. Beautiful believer. I talk to her every week. I miss her sorely. So I knew I was going to go back, be with her and stay there and do her service. So I was going to make a trip from Oregon. I was going to go to the store and get some stuff for the trip. I decided to take the back way to the country, to another store, just to get out in the country a little bit, clear my head. Went into this town called McMinnville. I don't know anybody in McMinnville. Went to the store, came out, went into a Starbucks. And outside, people are having their coffee under the umbrellas. Mm-hmm. There's this lady, and she's got a shorter version of a German Shepherd. He's kind of looking at me. And every instinct in me was to go over there like I did every year since. Anybody with a pet, I'm obnoxious. Can I pet your dog? Can I give your dog a treat? And I always tell them about Bruno, but I didn't this time. I felt like, it's been almost 20 years. People don't want to hear that. Went in and got my coffee. I came out. I couldn't help myself. I went over. I said, can I pet your dog? She let me do that. And I started telling her about Bruno. Never been in McMinnville, never laid eyes on this lady. She let me go on for a couple of minutes and she interrupted me and she said, no, you got it all wrong. I said, what? She said, that dog's name wasn't Bruno, it's Uno. I said, you know that dog? She said, I bred my dog with Uno. This is his daughter. So one last thing with that story. First of all, Bruno was a rock star at Ground Zero. He was one of the ones that was climbing around in the pile. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can.
Can you see the things on his paws?
Yes.
You can see the lady with the black hair. That's Pat Gartman, his owner. I met her there, and she's the one that in the pier building. But those things are on his booties because the dogs at the pile, it was still underneath it was still burning. And so they were actually burning their pads, and they jerry-rigged these pads. She changed it 6 times a day. And Bruno kept going, or Uno kept going back. So I reconnected with her during the pandemic. And last week, I did an interview in my hometown with Pat Gartman on the radio, talking about Uno. Guess where she lived all along? Cottage Grove, Oregon, where I was pastoring. She was probably 3 miles away from the church. I didn't even know it.
Wow.
You talk about a
Wow.
Holy Spirit orchestrated thing, huh? Wow.
That's amazing, really amazing in this process. So I do want to try to get one more thing from you because I'm curious if you could say one thing to everybody that's listening concerning maybe the aftermath of where we're at as a nation right now, whatever it is, if you could say one thing to those that are listening or watching, what is that one thing?
I would say Jeremiah, when they threw him into a cistern during the siege of Babylon. He was in a cistern. Josephus, the historian, says that he was probably in mud up to his neck. He called out to God. And in the book of Lamentations that he wrote after the siege and during the captivity, he wrote Lamentations, he says this: the wormwood, the bitterness, and the gall, my soul continually thinks of it, and thus is bowed deep within me, comma. But this one thing I call to mind, and thus I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness, O God. And I would say to people, if you're up to your neck in trouble, if there's a debris field around your life right now, you call out to God, because this morning his mercies were new for you, and he is faithful.
Very, very powerful. How can people find your book, From Rubble to Redemption?
It's on Amazon and on Kindle, and there's a website that I host called the Jude 3 Fellowship, the number 3, jude3fellowship.com. And I have an email at that, jim@jude3fellowship.com.
And are you on social media at all?
Yes, I'm on Facebook under my name.
Okay. I just want to make sure so others can connect with you as well. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be able to be a part of this. It means a lot to me to have you on.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. I can't thank people enough for helping me get this word out to people.
And for everybody else that's listening, I genuinely hope and pray that this episode has encouraged you, it has equipped you, and it has challenged you to further advance the kingdom of God. Until the next episode, guys, we love you and we bless you in the name of Jesus.
Thank you for listening to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. It is our prayer that this episode challenged you, encouraged you, and equipped you for the advancement of the kingdom of God. For more episodes or ways that you can partner with Ryan Johnson Ministries, please go to www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us. Please join us again soon for another episode of the Blacksmith Chronicles.